Okay, and I have a surprise for you guys today. So, I have my friend George here, and he's been listening to the May horoscopes. He's not into astrology. You know, much like people around you that are also not into astrology, like he knows about it, but it's just like, yeah, whatever. So, what George has offered to do is ask questions about things that don't make any sense to him as a non-astrology person. And we're going to share that conversation with you because you too may have the same questions. So there you go. Okay. So, sorry, George, what were we saying?
I would like to explain the eclipse that you kept mentioning.
Oh, okay. So, do you want me to explain it in terms of the astronomical phenomenon or the astrological phenomenon?
Astrological.
Thank you, because if you were about to make me explain this astronomically, like we'd be here all day while I was looking it up on Google.
Well, I mean, I know astronomically.
Good, because I don't want to get into that. Okay. So the eclipses, there's two types of eclipse. There's a solar eclipse and there's a lunar eclipse. And basically it's when the sun and moon are literally directly in front and behind each other, right? So it's kind of like one is standing in front of the other exactly.
Yeah.
And at that moment, it's eclipsing out or hiding the light from the other planet. Whichever one's in front hides the light from the one behind it.
Right.
And the idea, of course, is that light, as we know in terms of physics, is energy. So when we block the light, or we say that we're blocking the light of the planet, what we're really talking about is blocking the energy transmission from the planet. And there are people who would say, oh, well, you know, planets aren't transmitting energy, blah, blah, blah. Well, no, actually they are. Apparently, their planets are vibrating and emitting energies and sound waves, because there's actually audio recordings of sound waves coming from planets, and sound is energy, right? So it's not unthinkable that these sound waves or energy waves coming off of planets that create sounds that they've actually recorded are also having an effect on living things within its path. Hence, the changing of the tides with the lunations, right? Full moons make for high tides. You know, new moons make for low tides. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. Back to the eclipse. So with that said, the eclipses are either full moon eclipses or they're new moon eclipses, depending on which planet's in front of the other. With full moon eclipses, the best way to describe them is they're kind of like super full moons. So all of the things that we associate with a full moon astrologically, which would be an increase in sensitivity, hyper responsiveness, more emotional vulnerability, things really being exposed, because full moons light up the darkness. Whenever we have a full moon, you can see everything for miles in an open space outside, right? Other things that we associate with full moons is a lot more social activity. If you're planning an event or going somewhere, or even if you're not, and you're unexpectedly finding yourself in the middle of a situation like a bar fight, if it's under a full moon, right, those 3 days up to the full moon and the day after, you're guaranteed to have a much larger conflagration and response from people than you would any other time. Right? So, and this is why people always say, is there a full moon out there? What the hell's going on? Because the full moon excites people and gets them moving around. Now, new moons, so full moon eclipses are like full moons, but super full moons. And the idea is that whatever this particular full moon eclipse is impacting, especially if it's impacting something or triggering something in your personal chart, you're looking at, waves, like waves in the ocean coming out and away from that eclipse for up to 6 months before and after the event, right? So if we have this eclipse, for instance, that we just had in April 30th, if that eclipse connected to something in your chart activating it, the waves resulting from it, the triggers, the shock waves from the eclipse in your chart in your personal life extend out like as far out as 6 months before April and 6 months after April for something to manifest and become a concrete expression of this energy, like impacting you personally, right? So, with full moons, generally we're looking at only like a couple of days. It's usually 3 or 4 days before the full moon and people are nuts, and the day after, and then everything calms down. With full moon eclipses, it's 6 months. New moons are they're new moons, so it's a very quiet time. People tend to be more quiet, more reflective, more homebound during that time. People and animals want to hibernate under new moons, because under new moon, the light reflected by the moon of the sun is completely blocked out. So it's literally the darkest that the moon can be. And during those times, you can't see anything. So if you were out in a field under a new moon, it would be black as night everywhere you looked. Like there's no light available from anywhere except maybe the stars, which is not helping you down here, you know? So new moons tend to make everything very quiet and dark and tend to bury things, right? Tends to hibernate things, put them to sleep. New moon eclipses are like super new moons, right? In that it's the same thing, but again, rather than being a few days before and after, it's 6 months before and 6 months after. Somewhere in that window, that 6-month window, something, if it ties to your chart, that it's connected to, should manifest. Now, when a new moon eclipse manifests in your chart, so when a full moon eclipse manifests in your chart, things come to culmination. Full moons bring things to a head, right? Brings it up out onto the surface, out in the open where you can see it, and it brings it to a head. Things culminate because the full moon is the peak, like these people yelling. It's like the peak of something. It can't grow any more full. It's hit its maximum limit. The new moon is the exact opposite. So when the new moon eclipse occurs, what we can look for is a phasing out of something. So there is something that's going to be put to sleep, you know, or put into hibernation in your life. It's going to become dormant and not active, or is going to lose a lot of energy. So new moon eclipses, in theory, are planting new moons. There are times when we're planting seeds for the future, because the seeds, when we plant seeds, we typically plant seeds well ahead of their harvesting time. You know, so it's that part of a cycle. So in astrology, what we're looking at is how we use these particular lunar cycles, full moon eclipse, new moon eclipse, to decipher and determine if there's some significant event that may or may not be occurring in our personal lives that is part of our evolutionary journey. Because the thing that people often forget is that when we look at astrology and we look at the stuff, it's not about predicting things, right? You know, it's not about predicting events, although that's a pretty cool trick when you can do it. It's much more about how you can become a better version of yourself and what planetary alignments are occurring on your journey through your timeline on Earth, you know, that will help stimulate or trigger events and circumstances that give you opportunities to either strengthen, fortify, or discover things about yourself that will move you along to become the next best version of yourself. So when you're not doing your life like that, when you're not actively involved in trying to participate in the process of becoming the better version of yourself, not the better paid version, not the better looking version, you know, not the higher status version, because none of those things have anything to do with your value as a person, right? But when you're actively involved in the process of self-improvement, how do I become a better version of myself from the inside out? The astrology charts and all of these transits give you all the mile markers you need to figure out where you can go or where you're going, and also how far off track you've gotten, if that's the case, so you can get yourself back on track and have less struggle trying to get there. So, and I think people forget this because, you know, we have, in a lot of ways, we have forgotten or we have not been reminded enough, because I don't think this is a new problem, that money, status, and profession, all those external things, has nothing to do with you as a person. Because we, here in the United States, we've just had this where many people had money, had status, you know, and had great professions, lots of fame, and they were hardly, by any definition, you know, the model of decency, you know, or being even just a good person on a very basic level. They were horrible human beings who just happened to have all the things we typically associate with success at being better. Because who doesn't think, well, if you have a better job, you must be a better person, because how else would you get that job? We think of having high status jobs as being merit based. Ergo, you must be a better person. And that's not always the case. These things have nothing to do with each other. You know, we think of people having more money as, you know, being better people, because clearly you must have done something right to have gotten that far in your life to accumulate that kind of resources. And again, that's not true. That has nothing to do with who you are as a person. There are plenty of god-awful people. Jeffrey Epstein is a classic example, you know, who had obscene amounts of wealth and resources. And he was as far from a decent human being as you were going to get. So clearly, he may have been doing something right, but that's not right in terms of being a better person. You know what I mean? And look at all the famous people we know that are famous, you know, that are not good people at all. you know, like there's a guy in England, Tommy Seville. So apparently this guy was like our version of oh my God, who is the character that used to Pee Wee Herman?
Oh yes,
yeah.
He had a statue resurrected of him.
Oh,
he was that famous and that popular.
yeah. So and apparently he was a pedophile.
Yes.
You know, so
I know that story.
So you would so you would think that having all that status and fame and being so loved, right, would make you would be the measure of being a better person, because how else would you have achieved that much fame and popularity? Well, he did, and he certainly was not. You know, so when we look at this, we have to remind ourselves that what we're doing on the outside is not a reflection of who we are on the inside. All the things that are happening on the outside are literally like a jungle gym of experiences that we're using to become stronger, better people, because we're learning through our struggles and our hardships. Yeah, like they're having some struggles. So that's eclipse. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
Okay. Do you have any questions?
Awesome.
Okay, so here's what's interesting, right? So looking at your chart, are you okay with me putting some of your chart information out here?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, they don't know who you are. It's all good. All right. So to give you guys a brief example of how this kind of stuff works. Now, this is pretty interesting. I've known George for a while. I've never actually looked at his chart. I know what kind of astrologer would do such a thing, but you know, listen, it happens like that. So he has some planets in early Aries, so he's getting all this Aries energy this month. He's really getting, which is good. But here's what's interesting about his chart. Now, George carries a Sun-Mars-Saturn conjunction. Sun-Mars-Saturn conjunction in, ready for this? Late Aquarius. So this Saturn transit that we've been dealing with as it goes through the early part of the third decan, the last degrees of Aquarius. So right now it's about 25. So Saturn, as it's passing through the skies, has been all over wreaking havoc on his Sun, Mars, Saturn in his natal chart. Now, this means nothing unless you're an astrologer. So let me break it down for you. The sun represents your vitality and your verve and your will to live, and also the things that charge your battery. So think of the sun in your chart as your battery. And what happens when a battery is depleted? It needs to be recharged. What happens if the battery is not recharged? It drains out and becomes empty, right? But humans, when your battery becomes drained out and completely empty, you typically die. What usually happens is your battery becomes very depleted, and then it becomes very weak. And those are the times when your sun in your chart is really struggling because it's not being recharged, when you really feel like it's an effort just to get out of bed and wash your behind, right? And get the stink off you. Because there's just you don't see a good sunrise coming up. Depression is very common when the sun or your battery, your internal battery, is depleted. So it's very important for all of us to be on top of that. You don't need to know what time you were born or anything special. Literally, just knowing your sun sign will give you some clues about how you can fortify and recharge your internal battery so that you can get your verve and your swerve back on, so you can address and deal with the challenges of life. Because without it, everything's a struggle. Literally, just getting out of bed and having the confidence that it's worth trying to get out of bed is a challenge. Now, with this, we've also got Mars and Saturn on top of that sun. So with this, Mars represents your adrenaline, your risk-taking, your aggression, your testosterone, your libido. It represents all the fuel that we need to make things happen, right? So a weak Mars has difficulty getting up and going. Okay, because it's the gas in the engine, and when Mars is weak, it's like there's not enough gas in the engine to go as fast as you want to go. With Mars on the sun, what we typically get is somebody who is much more adrenaline driven, right? Or adrenaline becomes an issue in their lifetime in terms of their ability to get stuff done. So it can work both ways. When you see Sun Mars together, it doesn't always mean that you have somebody who's overly aggressive. Sometimes it can mean that for whatever reason, adrenaline is actually an issue for them in some other way. And here's why I'm saying that. Now, remember, with this Sun and Mars together, now we've got Saturn on top of it. So Saturn is a pain in the behind no matter where it shows up in the chart. There's literally no happy party where Saturn's concerned unless you're trying to go on some kind of ascetic monk, diet of air and prayers. And suffering is your joy. So with Saturn on top of that Sun Mars, literally, so we've got this fine race car that's revving and ready to go, like, because you've got the Sun, the planet of dynamic internal combustion, and Mars, the fuel and combustion and fire that makes things happen. Now you've got Saturn, the brakes of the car, on top of it saying, oh, hell no, you won't. So what this means in life is typically you get people who are often conflicted because Mars and Saturn, and certainly Sun Saturn, are opposite energies, right? They're conflicting energies. You have somebody who's tremendously driven and has a great dynamic ambition, Sun Mars, but that cold water of fear, right, or self-doubt or lack of confidence, Saturn, sits heavy on their head. So for every 1 step or 2 steps forward they take, it's 5 steps back based on fear and self-doubt. Now, before you start going crazy and reading this in the people's chart, you got to understand a couple of things. One, these things can absolutely be circumstance driven. Remember, your chart is going to be your chart, whether you were born in a slum in Calcutta or born in a high-rise penthouse in New York City. Your chart is always going to be your chart. Your challenges, however, based on your circumstances and your environment, will be very different. So don't assume that the chart can tell you everything. You have to take into account the person's life circumstances that they have inherited this time around, because that gives you the other half of the picture. So with this Sun, Mars, Saturn, we know we've got somebody who in this lifetime is going to struggle with identity, the Sun, self-confidence and courage, Mars, okay, and self-worth, Saturn. When we put all of these things together and we ask the person to frame that in their life, parts of their life are going to make a lot more sense. And, you know, the thing about it is with astrology, we're not looking at astrology because we want someone to wax gloriously about us for hours. Although, you know, that might certainly be the case too. More often than not, we're looking for astrology to give us answers that we're not able to find ourselves. So in this particular situation, and we're getting back to the transits in a minute, one of the things that we're looking at is this person must learn, in order for them to get through this life successfully with the least amount of trauma and damage to themselves, they must learn, incorporate, and embrace self-discipline, but not self-discipline like they're beating themselves with community chains and whipping themselves for being bad people. Self-discipline in that they have a routine and a structure, because that's Aquarius. Aquarius likes systems, and they like structures, and they like routines. But Saturn, and with the Sun, Mars, is going to require them to make their own, not accept what other people give them, which is going to be another problem, because when you don't trust yourself, you rely on other people to make sense of the world for you and give you a structure to work from. With this particular combination in sign of Aquarius, the hardest and most important lesson that they can learn is how to define and develop their own systems for getting through the day, getting through the week, getting through life, getting through their finances, getting through their relationships. Everything has to become a system, a set of systems that they have built based on who they are, not what other people think they should be. That's the biggest challenge with a Sun, Mars, Saturn combination like this. And it is not as easy as it looks. For you and I, it's easy because we don't have these challenges. This is not our celestial map. For the person dealing with these particular karmic weights around their neck, this is, for them, a huge challenge. So be very delicate with people when you're seeing their Saturn things pop up strong like this. Now, here's where the eclipse is coming in. Remember, my friends, we've got this, ooh, boy, do we ever. We've got this eclipse at 25 Scorpio. So the sun and the moon are involved in this eclipse. But guess what else is involved there? That's right, Saturn at 25 Aquarius. So Saturn, and we're going to get in the eclipse in a minute, the Saturn sets up a T-square with this eclipse, which is going to make this particular eclipse particularly gnarly and also particularly powerful. So there is the opportunity to finally set wheels in the motion by getting the lead out, literally getting the garbage out, right? And starting fresh, as well as just going through a whole lot of stuff that's going to show you, rather than getting the garbage out, it's going to show you where the garbage actually is so that you can begin the process of getting rid of stuff that you just don't need hanging on your neck anymore. With my friend's chart here, with all of this, because Saturn he's on a Saturn return on top of everything else. So with all of the Saturn involved in the eclipse and this being a Saturn return, this year and this month in particular, holy sweet baby Jesus in a baby carriage, this month in particular is going to be a pivotal month in terms of turning corners in his life. So, you know, one of the things I just want to share with you is once you get past a certain age in life, you kind of feel like it's all over. Like there's nowhere to go from here because you're just old. I'm just old and washed up and there's just no point now. And everybody who is past the age of 45 has had this conversation, probably a lot and frequently, either with themselves in a whiskey bottle or commiserating with friends who are having the same conversation. And the fact of the matter is, astrology shows us that you are a dynamic, amazing person, and some things need to bake in that oven longer than others. So for those of you who are coming into your own and your strengths and your identities and the glory of who you are late in life, understand that it's not because there's anything wrong with you. It's because you, my friend, needed to bake in that oven a little longer to be the perfection that is you. Because had we pulled you out any sooner, you would have collapsed and become nothing. Some things need more time in the oven. Okay, so with that said, this is going to be a really powerful eclipse for him, which could be painful, but it can also be absolutely glorious. So we'll be waiting to see what happens. But we do know with this particular eclipse, certainly triggering his Sun, his Mars, and his Saturn, and being a Saturn return, this is going to be either a crowning moment in his life and or a defining one. But either way, it's going to be a strong one. So there you go. Okay, now I just asked for his permission if I could talk about this because this is a very personal thing. So just really quick, I just want to add this because this is fascinating, and then we'll move on to the eclipse. Now, remember when I talked about Sun, Mars, and Saturn, and Sun being vitality, Mars being your adrenaline, right, and Saturn being, you know, fear and cold and stuff like that. So here are some other things I want to lay down on you. All right. The Sun rules also in the physical body. The Sun rules the heart. Mars rules the blood. Okay. And Saturn rules things that are broken down or breaking down. Also cold, right? In Chinese medicine, cold, the temperature of cold is read as something that is bad for certain things. So when an organ in Chinese medicine has too much cold in it, it's weak. It won't work effectively because cold contracts and slows things down. My friend George has, for a very long time in his life, dealt with kidney issues, which are directly related to cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone. Stress and cortisol have direct correlations with the planet Mars, right? Aquarius, I'm pretty sure it's Libra, but it might be Aquarius as well. Aquarius has to do with the nervous system, but also too with the Sun, Mars, Saturn, Saturn in particular, also the kidneys, right? So it's not, it makes all kinds of sense that his Sun, Mars, Saturn issues are presenting as problems with his kidneys not being as strong and robust as they could be, because the weight of that chilling Saturn, that cold Saturn energy that is representative or symbolic of the hindrance or holding back, the fear that he may have been or may not been dealing with through his entire lifetime, that has been a hurdle he needs to get over, has instead manifested, or has been there so long it is solidified and manifested in kidney dysfunction, which, if you know anything about kidney disease, will absolutely slow you down and deplete your vitality. And it's absolutely a blood issue because your kidneys are necessary for washing your blood, you know, and without good, strong kidneys washing your blood, there's also issues with circulation and the heart, which are also under the Sun. So I thought that was an interesting correlation. Again, I absolutely do not advocate astrology as a substitute for medical care or treatment or diagnosis. I'm only putting that out there because I thought this is an interesting correlation between symbolism and physical effect. And on that note, we're going to say goodbye and move on to the eclipse specifically. George, say goodbye.
Goodbye.
So that's my friend George, folks. And if anybody's interested, I can give you this information if you need somebody to do voiceover work. So he has a lovely, lovely narrator's voice. All right, kids, on to the eclipse.